Hi everyone. Before starting, I'll just give you guys one very interesting paradox of software development. Any software company you are working for or you have worked for, they will always say that security is front and center of our offering, our service, our tool. But you all know and we all know that once the product has been developed, at least the main functionality has been developed, security comes as that afterthought. Okay. Now, everything is done, let us paste the security. So, it is very poetic that this session which talks about security comes last. Okay, no, I am just joking, okay, because the previous sessions they were kind of fundamental for what I am going to talk about, and especially previous session from Srinivas and Shivraj. They briefly mentioned about identity. They showed one small point where the client's identity was being shown, and that is the crux of my topic. So, yeah, very aptly put. So, all of you have worked on or you using MCP. Which of these is the correct full form of MCP? How many choose A? How many choose B? Okay, most of you. How many choose C? Okay, good. I won't take much time. Yes, B is the right answer. And as Anthropic had very succinctly defined MCP, it is the type C for all the connections of the tools, right. So, in the previous sessions we understood about how agents work, how they are so powerful at what they do, and you all know that using MCP, the tools that have been given to them, the capabilities that have been given to them, that is what makes them powerful. Otherwise, they are just going to talk to LLM and have all the training data that they have got. Okay. So, even basic things like being able to search the internet, that is coming through MCP, right. This is how the entire life cycle of an MCP tool call looks like. So, Srinivas earlier mentioned that when the client starts or first time, if whenever you configure an MCP server, the client starts and it sends an initialize call to the server. It gets some information back, it gets the basic information, it sends a tool call and then it gets the tools information. And then depending on your query, whatever LLM decides that next tool has to be called, then that particular tool is called. The tool call goes to the server, server executes that call, returns the tool output, and somewhere as if your flow involves human in the loop, then you are asked for permission to go on, right. So, that is the simplest thing, but this diagram does not show a very does not answer a very basic question. Who is allowed to call these tools? Where is that identity or that RBAC kind of thing, RBAC or ABAC, that is being put? This diagram is very high level, does not talk about that, and that is something that we have to talk about. So, when does the server need authentication, right? You have a very simple MCP tool running on your machine or probably on weather.com maybe, where no context is needed. Okay. You just you are building maybe itinerary design application or maybe an e-commerce application, and you want to know how the weather is going to be like for your LLM to decide how much what would be the delivery or what should be your plans, right. So, you make this simple call to weather.com, you get the weather in that particular place, what is the chance of rainfall, no chance, okay, delivery will be super quick, do not pack any umbrella if you are planning to go out, things like those, no context needed. But many of you using Atlassian. So, now for Atlassian there are two things, there are two levels of context, that user context that is required. First of all, your organization, right. You are if you are in Broadcom, you want to see the Jira tickets of Broadcom, not Pegasystems, right. And then even in Broadcom, you want to see only your Jira tickets, not your colleagues, right. I know it is fancy to say one organization, one company, one team, but does not mean everybody is going to solve everybody's tickets, right. So, that is where you need authentication and you need identity, right. Even in the same company, you need if you are working as different clients, you need the identity. So, one interesting thing is that if your MCP, you all will know that there are STDIO and HTTP, those two formats for MCPs. So, usually STDIOs are something that your client or your client is triggering, right. So, in that sense, not much requirement of authentication, you may have, but it is not mandatory. But if it is on HTTP, then probably yes. If the user context is needed, then definitely yes. So, how does the server know who I am? So, basically this is a fancy way of saying what are the different mechanisms for establishing authentication, right. So, these things that are listed here, these options, you all are aware of these, right. API keys, MTLS, basically creating certificate and trusting those certificates, JWTs or custom bearer tokens, cookies, sessions, SAML, if you are really 20,000 years old. These are well known options, right. We all know about these options. This table is not listing one very prominent option. Can somebody guess what that is? OAuth, absolutely, OAuth. And that is where MCP has decided to move ahead, right. So, I will very quickly show how this looks like. Let me. Okay. So, the whole point of MCP OAuth is that your clients are self-sufficient in discovering and getting authenticated. So, as less okay. So, whole idea is about self-sufficiency here, okay, self-discovery. So, first step, MCP, your client sends a call to your MCP server without any token, it is immediately sent a 401 with some information about resource metadata. This thing is important here, I hope you guys can see. Oh no, my bad. Can see now? Okay. Yeah. So, the first step, your client, MCP client sends a request to MCP server without any token and it immediately gets a 401 unauthorized with some information. This is a well known header www authenticate and it sends the resource metadata. So, this guy sends it in this format. Okay. Then, now the client is aware of where it has to go, what it has to find out, what are the authorization servers which are trusted. Okay. Next, it makes the call to that authorization server that it got in the first step, and if you see, so this particular thing has got the 3 endpoints for authorization, for token and for registration. Then it can go for dynamic client registration or it can go for other registration mechanisms depending on what auth server has opened, right. So, by this point I am not going to the entire flow, because once you have registered, you know that you will get the token and then how the OAuth works, you all know that. So, I am not going in detail, but this is what MCP has decided to go ahead with. They have tapped in on the same OAuth flow, which is very well known and almost very well implemented everywhere, with these couple of steps that I showed you, okay, where client will ask the server will give all the details and then that is it, the client will do everything. So, what does MCP add? It adds a protected resource metadata, that www authenticate stuff that you just saw. That is where the client discovers which auth server to use. instead of being told. So, server does not have to tell anything else, that is it. Auth server metadata discovery, the three endpoints that I showed you for authorization, for token and for registration. PKCE. So, you guys will know that in current OAuth 2.1 PKCE is not mandatory. Okay. PKCE is an extra level of security where MCP server asks client to send some other value, so that it can easily identify what it is in for those clients which cannot store any which do not have any backend for storing any code or any token, right. Things like your mobile applications or single page web apps. So, that stuff is mandatory here, because all your MCP clients like let us say Cloud Code or Open Code, Copilot, these are all public clients. Okay. And finally, the resource indicators. This is something interesting that client does. It tells that okay, I am trying to talk to which server, so that the token that is given is not replayed against some other server. So, I just wanted to show you guys one funny thing. So, I have added Atlassian's MCP here in cursor, and if you see this, this is the redirect URI. Okay. This has got its own URI starting with cursor. Okay. And I have got I am trying to do the same thing for Open Code now. So, one thing that you will notice is that when I clicked on when I am trying to add Atlassian's MCP server to my cursor or here in Open Code, all I have to do is just go and paste some small JSON in any of these configuration files, right. That is it, simple for me. I just showed you cursor's redirect URI, and whenever this thing will open, you will see that this has got an HTTP endpoint. Okay. And if I would do the same thing in Copilot or in Cloud Code, you will see that the redirect URI is completely different. Okay. So, this is going to take a long time, I am not going to wait, let us get back here. So, I just okay, it opened. Yeah. So, for Open Code, yeah, for Open Code, your redirect URI is this 127.0.0.1.19 MCP OAuth callback. Okay. And this small JSON snippet that you see is if you are using a pre-registered client. Okay. Usually, if for Atlassian, if you are using DCR or something, then you do not have to add all this, but if your client is pre-registered client where you have to give client ID, client secret, all that stuff, then it is going to show something like this. For now, just look at that redirect URI. This is for Copilot. Okay. No MCP or anything after the port number. For Cloud Code, again you have got similar. Just look at the JSON now. Okay. Codex does not even use JSON, it uses Tune, which is totally different thing. Similar thing for cursor. So, the point that I am trying to make here is that this was easy for me as the user, as the MCP client. I am just adding something and it is done. For gateway, now this becomes difficult for me. Consider yourself from gateway services perspective. If you are the service owner for gateway service, then what you have to do? You have to identify the clients. Which clients are you willing to recognize? Okay. Are these going to be the well-known client, the Cloud Codes and Open Codes, VS Codes, these, or any person can write a custom MCP client and you are going to allow that. How do you onboard them? So, like what you saw in Srinivas's flow, that your client had an identity. At what point is that identity given to them? Before using your MCP server, does the client need to have identity, or just in time, and when they are running the client, at that time they can gain that identity? Third thing, audit. How are you going to audit them? How are you going to keep track of what they are doing? Because this is very critical point here, because you know that agents can do anything. You must have heard recently how agents deleted some databases or they hacked Hugging Face, right. So, it is very critical for us to be able to audit the performances or actions of an agent. And finally, what policies do you apply for any client? So, we are going to talk about this onboarding point. At what point you are assigning the identity? So, first of all is pre-registration. This is the simplest thing. Okay. If your service, if your system has got a mechanism for pre-registering a client, that before you do anything you have to register, maybe it is by self-service or you do it through ticket. You raise a ticket, okay, register my client, and they create a client for you. Either way, so you are doing the pre-registration here. Okay. So, if that is done, fine, you have got a client ID and client secret registered, you go ahead and give that information to your MCP client. When you are adding the MCP server, you are set. So, the thing is that if you have got the self service, very good, go ahead and use it. Otherwise, if you are doing it through tickets or something, then this is a manual effort and it is difficult to scale up. Client ID metadata documents, this is something that Atlassian is using. So, rather than registering a client, having a pre-registered client, they use the metadata, which looks like, if you can see the client ID here, it is visible, yeah. So, if you see the client ID, this is a well known URL here, okay, and that is what Atlassian is going to use as the client ID. Okay. So, client ID itself is a URL, and now this becomes the interesting point here. Once again, the thing that I had asked earlier, whom are you going to allow? Is your client ID well known enough? It is well known enough for Copilot, it is well known enough for VS Code, but if tomorrow I write one new tool, is it going to be well known enough for Atlassian to allow it? May not be. So, that is a decision that the gateway team has to take, the server has to take. And DCR, this is again the one of the most popular mechanisms, and the spec says that use it for backward compatibility, but this is when the interesting thing happens and registration moves into the protocol itself. Okay. So, the client requests an identity dynamically, server decides if it has to issue or not, and the thing is that registration is easy in this case. Okay. Deciding what registrations to accept, that becomes a little tricky here, because till now you had, for pre-registration you knew that okay, this guy is already registered, I have to accept him, this guy is not registered, I ignore him, this client ID metadata document URL is not well known enough, I am going to ignore him. Now, it becomes difficult because this registration is happening during the connection itself. Okay. I have a small, very small demo. Okay. Yeah. So, what I am trying to do here, I have written a very small, very simple MCP client, and it is talking to Atlassian's server. Okay, let me hide it. Yeah. and you will see that Atlassian is using DCR here. So, what is happening is that in the first step it send the request and it has got the result from Atlassian. So, if you see the DCR response, it has got the client ID issued at, all that information. Now, in the third and this step, I take out the client ID. This is the client ID that got registered, if you see this thing. Okay. So, now you have got the client ID and now you can proceed with your OAuth. Okay. So, this is the callback, the redirect URI. So, one interesting thing when I was writing this thing was that if the scope, so these permissions, if you see read, search, write, these are the scopes that Atlassian server exposes. So, when I was writing this first, I had given some generic scope and it was being ignored. Okay. And when I gave this, then it is able to. So, probably this is one criteria on which the server can choose to either reject or allow any particular request to come in. Okay. So, I will just accept it. So, this is how the entire DCR works. You send some request, it identifies who you are and proceeds, assigns you a client ID and proceeds you for registration. So, the identity was given at the point when it tried to connect. So, how do you choose the onboarding model, right? Is it something that is supposed to sound fancy? Not necessarily. So, if you already have, I am not going to read this table, you can read if you want. This thing just gives you some pointers, some criteria of how to decide your identity. One point that this table does not mention is your business, how your business chooses to do this. Okay. If you already have got nicely working pre-registration through self-service, you allow your users to register themselves, very good, you do not have to do anything else. You simply use pre-registration, allow your MCP clients to either programmatically through API call or by human, whoever is using that self-service, to generate the client ID and use it. If you do not have, then what options do you have? Do you use DCR? Do you want to use DCR? And that depends on this thing, blast radius, because this one is going to be something that is tricky and something that you have to carefully decide, because other things are like registration is bounded by registration process, this by meta trust chain. This is defined by how you are going to allow. Okay. What is your registration policy? Effort, once again, as I said, if you have got pre-registration through self-service, best. If not, then it is manual, very difficult to scale. For 10 clients, okay, fine, you are doing it through tickets. For 1000 clients, it is going to be a headache. And at some point, you have to decide how to go ahead and manage all those client registration requests. For CIMD, if you are exposing your MCP server to only well-known clients, very good, you are safe. But if you want to make it something that everybody can use and any new MCP client can come in and use it, then again it is going to be very difficult. DCR strikes a balance here. Okay. So, what are the takeaways? MCP has standardized tool invocation, okay, but client onboarding is a problem that still everybody has to solve. This is like one of those problems of connecting your laptop to presentation, where nothing has been yet finalized. The simplest thing which could have been finalized, the redirect URI that we saw, that still is open. Onboarding is operator's decision, and that is something that OAuth gives you only the point till you get the client ID. After that, everything you have to choose. The three mechanisms, you will see that DCR is often suggested in blog posts and all, but it is not black and white thing. It depends on the use cases, and that is something that has to be decided by the MCP server team and choose the model that matches your trust model. Thank you, guys. I run a small newsletter. This is an AI generated AI newsletter without all the fluff. So, if you want, you can subscribe to that. Yeah, that's very simple newsletter, just 5 minutes. It gives you all the information about what is happening in the AI world without those kinds of words that you won't believe what happened today. That no, simple things. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.